recognition of July, which is National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. And we'd like to thank you all for attending our first event in a series of events this month, where we will raise awareness around the struggles of underrepresented communities, or as we like to call it, the global majority, and the issues they face around mental illness. Just to give a highlight of some numbers before I introduce our speakers, 17% of African American community live with mental illness. 15% of Latinx Americans live with mental illness. 13% of Asian Americans and 23% of Native American and Alaskan Natives live with mental illness in the United States. So this is an issue that affects many people within our community. I'd first like to introduce Tiffany Mayers. Tiffany Mayers is a licensed, let me make sure I have. Tiffany Mayers began her mental health career as an in-home behavioral assistant. She currently works as administrative director at the Rutgers University School of Social Work, and as a part-time therapist focusing on children and families experiencing behavioral and mental health challenges. Ms. Mayers is a consultant with NAMI-NJ New Jersey's African American program, ACT-NOW, as the Central Regional Coordinator. She works with the African American community to bring awareness to mental health and eradicate stigma. This passion stems from her personal experience raising a child with a mental health diagnosis. She is the owner of Mental Health T Enterprises. Tiffany is currently in the Doctor of Social Work program at the University of Kentucky, and she completed her bachelor's degree in psychology with a minor in social work at Seton Hall University and her MSW at Rutgers University. I'd like to introduce Tiffany. Our second speaker is Carmen Cusido. She is author of Coping with Eating Disorders and began her tenure as a senior accountant director at Mike Worldwide's public affairs practice in November 2021. In addition, Cusido teaches a communications course at Hudson County Community College and has taught journalism at King University. Before joining Mike Worldwide, Cusido served as a speechwriter and former director in the Office of Public Affairs in the New Jersey Department of Education. In her 17-year career, Cusido has also worked at organizations like Twitter and Wildlife Conservation Society. Her writing has appeared in NBC News, CNN, NPR, Cosmopolitan, New Jersey Monthly, and other publications. In addition to this work, Carmen has written about US-Cuba relations, the lives of immigrants, and her recovery from anorexia. So thank you all for joining us. And I'd like to start the panel discussion with the first question to Tiffany. And we just celebrated Mental Health Awareness Month in May. What are some of the reasons to take time out specifically to address the mental health needs of Black, Indigenous, people of color, and why does this matter?
Good afternoon, everyone. And I just want to first start off by thanking you, Jesselie, and the Latino Action Network Foundation for putting together this dialogue, because it's very much needed, right? And as you say, we're celebrating Minority Mental Health Awareness Month and talking about the importance of this topic within our own communities. So I would start off with saying, it's important to have this conversation because we're dealing with so many challenges. So much is going on, and the challenges that we experience impact our mental health wellness. So I'll start a little bit with my own story and then continue to answer your question. So as you said in my bio, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've been in the field since about 2003 in different capacities. But I don't really think my real mental health journey started until I had to care. I was helping my mother care for my brother, who had started displaying some mental health challenges around when he was about the age of 3 years old. So it was one thing to learn about mental health and psychology and all those things from like a school perspective, but it was like a whole different experience and exposure as a person who had to learn to navigate the system themselves from a personal perspective. And, you know, my mom and I, we needed help. And at the time, which was about 20 years ago at this point, mental health was still very taboo of a conversation in the Black community. And even within my family, like, I think that there were times when my mother was kind of in denial about whether or not some of the things that the doctors were saying was accurate or was true. So we really needed help navigating like school systems. We needed help understanding how to best provide my brother with assistance rather than reacting to the behaviors that he was exhibiting in school. So at 5 years old, should you be expelling a student or should you be figuring out other programs or other ways of working with him so that way he doesn't exhibit these behaviors? But the stigma behind it all was really the larger hurdle that we had, we meaning my family at the time had, and also we meaning within the Black community and within other minority communities too, right? The stigma of mental health is just something that really keeps us from seeking services, really looking into services, and really believing that there's a need for what we are seeking. So for me and my mom, we went through different channels and had to listen to different people and give input. But then I came across NAMI-New Jersey. So that's the National Alliance on Mental Illness, because I was searching for, okay, here I am wearing a hat of being somebody in the field, but having to help navigate this world as a newly person in the field, but having to convince older people, my mom and others, about this being the real deal, right? So I did a lot of research and I came across NAMI-New Jersey. And what I liked about the information I found then was that they had various multicultural programs. So like you said, I'm a part of the AACT-NOW, which is the African American outreach, but they have NAMI in Espanol, which is the Latinx community, CAMHOP, which is for the Chinese community, and SAMHAJ, which services the South Asian community. So being exposed to NAMI and its multicultural programs enabled me to be able to say to my mom, other people are experiencing this as well. And, you know, this is something that doesn't have to be taboo. It doesn't have to be a conversation that we want to avoid. Maybe we can see what others are experiencing. And I think for us meaning minorities and, you know, people in these communities, I think when you can team up and pair up and you don't feel isolated and just outcasted for something that's going on, there's less shame. And then we can begin to eradicate stigma, and then there'll be less stigma around the subject of mental health. So that was back in 2008. I've been a member of NAMI-New Jersey and AACT-NOW ever since. So I like to start off with telling a little bit about my story, because to me, I am the why it matters, right? Because not only can you know something and can you be able to be that professional and that clinician, but you still have your own struggles. You still have a community of people who you want to engage in. So the why it matters is because our mental health impacts everything that goes on in our lives, right? It impacts our overall health and wellness. So with everything that's going on nowadays, you have the COVID, with the numbers keep fluctuating. You have different community killings and shootings in the schools. I mean, it's just so much right now. The list can go on how these things are ultimately impacting our mental health wellness. And I think that there is there needs to be a clearer understanding of mental health and mental illness. And I think that through advocating and through discussions like we're having today, it helps ease people's or ease the stigma around certain things, because we all have mental health, right? It just depends on what's going on with us at the time, or whether it's illness or not. So I think that it's,
Tiffany,
sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to engage because you said so many important things at first, the intersections of mental health or mental illness and, kind of policing it in schools and in the community, and how, people with mental illnesses are often misperceived, right, as aggressive or labeled, right? Even in the context of shootings, right, of these school shootings, how often it comes up, it's a person with mental illness, and really, like, what is that really the case? Is that really, like, because so many people live with mental illness and do not commit acts of violence. So how can we raise awareness around that? And being, a person of color, how your brother may have been perceived very differently, and his behaviors of his mental health, I don't know.
And we experienced all of that. And I think my mom, as the primary caregiver, she also internalized and had different perceptions of how she was being treated for her son being a young Black male versus someone else, their child acting out. Would their child just automatically be suspended from school, or would you have provided other resources for that child? So that's the reason why, when you ask, like, why does it matter? It matters for all of these reasons, because there are so many of us in the world who are experiencing mental health and mental illness on different levels and different ways. It's not clean cut. It's not cookie cutter. No one's experience is exactly the same. I'm excited to hear Carmen tell her story in a little while, because everyone's experience is different. So I think for me, I've just made it really my life's mission to go out and spread the word about mental health, the impact of mental health, and why it's important to advocate and bring awareness during months like this. And I just appreciate being a part of the dialogue today.
Thank you. Thank you. We'd love to hear about, hopefully we'll get to hear more about NAMI's work and efforts, the way that, so people can become more involved in those efforts. Yes. So Carmen, question, how does your lived experience influence your advocacy, and what do you feel are some of the biggest barriers facing Latinx families seeking mental health care?
Thank you for the question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. You know how weather patterns kind of affect everything. So if I lose you guys, I apologize. I will connect by cell phone. But Jessie, thank you so much for the introduction. And Tiffany, of course, thank you for sharing both your little bit of your personal and professional stories. So a little bit about my lived experiences. So I'm Cuban American, and that does factor in. I was diagnosed simultaneously with anorexia, had dropped down to 60 pounds and almost died, and with depression 25 years ago in 1997. And so I remember being in the eating disorder hospital, and while I loved my therapist, she was great, we had to translate for my dad, right? My mom and I, so they were both Cuban exiles who came here when they were older, but my dad was significantly older. And so not only was there the language barrier where English was very tough for him, but there's also the whole, what is anorexia? Why does my daughter have this? What's going on? So it was like two-part translation, almost like translating what mental health issues are, and also linguistically, like, your daughter's gonna need medically to stay alive a nasogastric tube, a tube from my nose down to my stomach. So that was hard. It took me a few years, but I ultimately recovered from anorexia, and I felt luckier than most in the sense that, so I was working class, and most of the young women, and it was mostly young women who were in the hospital were richer. But because my mother, may they both rest in peace now, but because my mother had been a teacher, she had excellent health coverage. And so by default, I had excellent health coverage. And it makes me emotional, but one of the things that I think about is how I could overhear the therapists in their offices fighting with insurance companies, like saying these young women need to stay longer. Yes, they're medically stable, they've gained the weight, but they're still eating disordered. Like they still need to stay longer. So in that sense, I was luckier because my insurance was so good that I was able to get more comprehensive treatment. And I think ultimately that may have led to me being able to recover. But one of the reasons I'm very open about my struggle is because I think sometimes people in the Latino community don't recognize, right, that there are mental health issues going on. And, you know, personally, I'm Catholic, I believe in God, but usually what you hear from communities of color and our community, Jessely, is pray about it and it'll get better. And yes, prayer is wonderful, but prayer is not going to, for example, make diabetes go away. Just like it wouldn't make diabetes go away, it's not going to make an eating disorder or depression go away. You need to find the appropriate mental health care. Another reason I'm very open, you know, I consider myself fully recovered from anorexia. I think my last relapse was over a decade ago. And for those who may not know, relapse is when you go back to disordered behaviors. You know, in my case, it was an eating disorder, so it was restricting food or starvation. If somebody struggles with addiction, their relapse might be going back to that substance, for example. But depression is something that I live with and have lived with for more than 25 years. And thankfully, I'm doing well now, but there are times where it rears its ugly head. You know, for example, my mother died of lung cancer in 2019, and I had to quickly shift, not just deal with the grief, but quickly shift from caring for my father, who was at the time he was still alive, he was 14 years older and had dementia. So I had to learn how to be a caretaker very quickly, and I forgot to take care of myself. And thank you to Francesca. One of the articles that I wrote this year was about my suicide, thankfully failed, suicide attempt 3.5 years ago after my mother passed away. I wrote it for Newsweek. And I think being able to tell these stories, right, helps destigmatize. Like, you know, people like to use the word normal. I hate using words like that, right? Because we all struggle with whatever it might be. It may not be mental health, it may be something else. But I think by putting it out there, you know, saying, hey, I've struggled, but I overcame. And it's not like one point in time, A to B, you're done. It's, I overcame that, but if I struggle
You're breaking up a little bit, Carmen.
again, here's the steps that sorry, can you hear me now?
Yep,
okay.
you're
I hope the rain doesn't, yeah.
You're good.
But in any case, to answer your question a little bit, I hope it was a roundabout way, but I think going just briefly back, healthcare is the biggest issue. And if people don't have really good health insurance, that's the biggest struggle I think Latinx families face. Not just Latinx, I think anybody who's working class, you know what I mean? Because there are people who are Caucasian who may not have the best health insurance, who may struggle as well. So I think we need to do a better job of putting money and resources to, like, governments need to do that, companies need to do that, put more money towards health insurance and comprehensive mental health. I think that is the biggest struggle. And honestly, the fact that there still is a lot of stigma associated, that if you say, I struggle with depression or I struggle with whatever the mental illness might be, that people look at you differently, you know, and you have to keep reinforcing, I'm just like you, this just happens to be my struggle.
Thank you, Carmen. Your story is so powerful, and we really want to thank you because you are the person who named this webinar, right? I mean, you named this event Living and Thriving with Mental Illness for a reason, and we highlighted all of your accolades and your accomplishments because to show and to really demystify that stigma of someone who is just very successful and still living and thriving with mental health conditions. And we really are so grateful to be able to speak with you. And you raised so many issues. You talked about language access, yeah, cultural barriers in treatment, explaining, communicating the mental health conditions through culture, right? health access, of course, right? Just coverage and whether mental health is prioritized as a healthcare need. That's so great. Those are some of the issues. I think we're still facing a lot of these issues today. And I'd love to hear a little bit more from Tiffany and NAMI and some of their efforts around these issues.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So as you were talking, Carmen, I'm jotting down notes over here because I'm like, Carmen's right on point with this. So one of the things that you mentioned that I definitely want to reiterate and piggyback off of a little bit is the familial stressors that you mentioned. So you mentioned having to be a child, but still having to help and care for others, and still having the expectation of providing and doing for your family, but kind of forsaking your own mental wellness because of that. And I think that in communities of color, that happens more frequently than we probably want to claim, and more frequently than it should, right? Because that's often, right now as a clinician, I work primarily with young adults so 25 down to like 5, the youngest. And a lot of challenges that I see in my clients of color are things like that. Like, I'm the big brother and I got to take care of my little siblings, and then mom's at work and those types of things. And it's not to say that I don't see some of that in my clients that are Caucasian, but I notice, and I just pay attention to it, that a lot of those types of factors go into why some of my clients are presenting with anxiety, because they're feeling like they're not living up to the expectations, or how can they balance it all? I'm so overwhelmed. I have these, these demands on me, but I just want to be a kid, those types of things. So I hear that often. So when you mentioned it earlier, I thought it was noteworthy for me to jot down. But back to what you were saying, Jesselyn. So I can go into a little bit more detail as far as NAMI and some of the services. Beyond just the multicultural, so there's obviously NAMI National, and then each state has its own state office. So within our state office, we have a variety of programs that we do. So we have Sharing Hope, and I mentioned it to Carmen the other day when I talked to her, because Sharing Hope is really an opportunity for dialogue like today, where Carmen would come and kind of tell her story to kind of, like you said, Justly, to get rid of the stigma, to demystify it, to let people know you can be successful and you can have this too, right? Whatever this thing is, because we all have something. It just depends on how it's presenting for the day, or how, what the last month has been like for somebody. Everyone's just one episode, so to speak, away from some other for some other struggle, right? So we have Sharing Hope. We also have, we do a 16-week, I believe it's still 16 weeks, but it might have been cut down during the pandemic. But we do like a weekly family to family course, which basically allows for you to learn about various mental illnesses. So it's kind of like Mental Health 101, but it's taught from a peer perspective or a loved one. So that was one of the first courses that I took through NAMI when I found them back in 2008, was the family to family course, because I knew the information, but I needed to be able to put it in as much layman's terms as possible for my mother. So that was something that we do. We also go into schools. We pair up with local churches, other organizations like I'm Here Today. And we do this because we recognize that, yes, there is a boatload of stigma that's attached to mental health, but then there's also just pure lack of knowledge about mental health. And everyone who does not wake up and say, oh, I'm going to go to therapy tomorrow because I'm having troubles, doesn't necessarily not want to go, but maybe they just don't know how to locate a clinician. So NAMI provides that information. If you call our main office, we have a directory. We even have a directory where you can specify, can you point me in a direction of a Spanish-speaking clinician? And we try to keep that information as we find out about it, kind of like in a little directory, so that way we can help people navigate whatever their journey is. So I think I think Francesca put the website in there for the multicultural outreach, but feel free to poke around. And before we finish today, I'll be sure to give my email. If anyone has any specific questions, I can kind of guide you in the right direction. But I mean, NAMI has a wealth of resources. We try to make all of our resources free to the community. And as we're starting to do more in-person things starting this fall, we will look to have more community engagement. And as you mentioned earlier, Jesseline, I'm over the central region. So I try to do events from Union County down through Ocean. So, and that's a few counties in between there, but, and our main office is in North Brunswick, so kind of centered in the middle. So, but any other questions, feel free to ask.
That's great. And I think to me, one of the most important aspects of NAMI's work, you know, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, is that it is founded and led by people with lived experience, yes, with mental illness or family members who live with mental illness. Absolutely. So it is the model peer program, and definitely, you know, that issue of having multiple roles. I always I'm also a licensed clinical social worker, and I kind of tell people, you know, we are kind of like have health, right? But you can have something healthy and with enough stressors over time without enough relief in between those stressors, you can easily kind of wear down what was previously maybe healthy enough, you know, for you to function. So it's definitely true that this is not like a nature kind of thing, but kind of like a little bit of both all the time. And that having a significant amount of stressors, like we talked about earlier, different roles, first generational stressors of being a person of color, race-based stress, all of that can kind of contribute and wear down somebody's mental health without that community support. And NAMI is definitely a great place for that community support. So thank you for the work that you do. So I'm going to share the next question, and this is really for both of you. So given both of your expertise, what are the most important things to keep in mind about mental illness? And what are some of the gaps in advocacy around issues facing those living with mental illness? How can we build power around them? I know it's a couple of three-part questions, but I guess we could start with what are the most important things to keep in mind?
And I'll let you go first, Carmen.
Yeah, thank you. I can just be brief, only because I see that it's starting to rain and I'm worried about the internet. Segue, or like a non sequitur, but I promise it makes sense. Earlier this year, two things happened to me that were physically debilitating. One, I had a bad fall in the winter, and my knee was just in really bad shape. And at some point, I even needed crutches. And a little earlier, late spring, early summer, I ended up having what Justin Bieber has, which is the Ramsay-Hunt syndrome. So I lost ability. I still haven't fully regained my hearing in my left ear. So if I keep leaning in, it's because I'm having trouble hearing sometimes. And I had Bell's palsy with my facial paralysis. I had trouble speaking. I had trouble swallowing solid foods at one point. So not only was that a challenge when it came to mental health, because being physically unhealthy, even for a brief period of time, was really taxing, not only on my body, but on my mind. But the one thing to keep in mind is when we think of mental health, that's like the invisible illness. You know what I mean? When I had the Bell's palsy and everything else going on, it was very much, you can physically see it. And so I think sometimes what we need to keep in mind is if we're seeing that a friend, for example, or a family member all of a sudden disengages or is starting to give away their property suddenly, you know, or had been depressed for a while and then suddenly seems happy, something's going on. You know, so the best thing is to maybe approach them and say, hey, is there anything going on? Can I, you know, is there anything I can do for you? You know, do you need help finding, you know, a doctor, medical professional, that kind of thing? Because I feel like sometimes we tend to forget as a society mental health because it's the invisible illness, you know? So that's something to keep in mind. How how to build power, I would just say briefly, before I switch over to my phone, Zoom, I would briefly just say, we build power by having conversations like these, right? By continuing to put our lived experiences out there, the way that people are doing with Roe versus Wade and the way that people are doing with other important issues. We do that for this too, because mental illness has a face. These are two faces, Tiffany and myself today, but we are among many people who are either going through it ourselves or have family members that we're advocating for.
So I'll jump in, Jessie, as well. So Carmen touched upon one of the things I was going to say, and that it was really continuing this conversation, right? Like always being prepared and willing to talk about mental health like we would talk about anything else that we have a passion for. And it's also about recognizing that, as we all have been saying, we all have or can have something, right? And I think that if we look at it, Carmen mentioned earlier about diabetes. She used diabetes as an example. And I love when people parallel mental health challenges with physical health challenges, because to her point, those are more evident. They are more physical presenting, right? But it does not necessarily mean that they're any more significant just because you can see them. And they all kind of, I have a pen in my hand, I don't want to drop it. They all kind of like blend in together, because if you are experiencing physical health, it does over time, this as a person who has had a number of injuries, a number of surgeries, it does kind of wear down on you. And like that, it starts to impact your mental health at that point, because you're like, oh, when am I going to be done with this? Or why do I always get hurt? And those types of things. So I definitely think that it's important to keep that conversation. But the one thing I want to add on to that is it's important to be proactive as well when we're talking about mental health challenges, or mental health just in general. So I love to tell people that I am a therapist. I faithfully see my therapist every 2 weeks. I feel like, what do you mean you're going on vacation? I need to see you. That because it helps me balance. It helps me maintain balance. So I think sometimes within our communities, we go from either being in denial about mental health altogether, or jumping straight to, oh, you want me to be on medication, or you want me to like these extremes, right? And not to say that not needing to be on medication is an extreme, but in the dialogue of mental health, they're used as weapons rather than resourceful tools. So that's what I mean when I say extremes. And it's really about seeking mental health support before the house falls down. It's really about utilizing therapy as a support system. I mean, when I made the decision to go back to school and work on my doctorate, I talked to my therapist about that. This was a joyous occasion. I was accepted into the university I wanted to be accepted into, but at the same time, this was going to be a life transition for me. It was going to mean I was going to have to tailor certain things that I did in my life. I was going to have to not be able to spend time with family and loved ones like I did. So I still felt it worthy of having that level of dialogue with my therapist, because that was still something important. I think sometimes we see therapy, or we hear about therapy, and we think it always has to be based on some type of trauma that has happened. It has to be something, catastrophic, something so significant that, I can't get out of bed tomorrow. And yes, those reasons may exist, but being a young woman who newly married and now pregnant for the first time, that in itself is therapy worthy, because now you're transitioning from not just being a single person, but now you have a partner. Now you have a different lifestyle you're living. Now you're expecting your first child. Are you going to live up to what you think motherhood looks like? These are some of the dialogues that you can have at therapy. And I think sometimes the picture is painted that therapy only looks one way. And I just want to make sure that I share today that therapy is like a coloring book. Pick up crayons and paint it how you color it how you want to. And
I love that analogy.
Yeah, and that's just, so I think that is what can continue to happen. These types of conversations and talking about changing the narrative and talking about things differently. And then the only other thing I'll talk about, to the point of your question about power, advocacy. Advocacy is power. Us having this conversation today is power, because regardless of how many people are hearing the message today, that many more can hear it if we all go back and then give it to someone else. And we share resources, just like in most communities of color, at least I know in the Black community, there's a pride about congregating and coming together, whether that's in places of worship or family reunions, different types of platforms. And so I look at mental health and the conversation surrounding it similar to that. Like, if one person knows something, the whole village can know it, right? Mm-hmm. And then that way we are able to expand more and more, and we can really eradicate the negative connotation that mental health carries, because we all can benefit from it, whether it's something that's personally affecting us or our loved ones or our children. It's affecting us at the end of the day. Our communities are hurting right now because we're not addressing the real elephant in the room, which is our mental health wellness and the reasons why we have these angst about seeking help.
For sure.
Can I just quickly piggyback off what Tiffany said, Jessely?
Yes, please.
Perfect. So something that stood out is, because I love seeing my therapist every week. It's like one of my favorite times a week, honestly. It's also about self-care. Mm-hmm. And it's also about, like, I was used to doing things for 3 decades of my life, and it wasn't necessarily healthy. It's just whatever coping mechanisms I had learned. Listen, none of us is perfect. Each of us in our lived experiences has some trauma, or may not. And in my case, my father had a lot of trauma that was unprocessed, and it was kind of foisted onto me. Mm-hmm. And I realized that a lot of the ways that I was doing things in my life outside of parental and familial relationships was really as a way to not upset anybody and to not kind of make waves, so to speak, mm-hmm. because I knew that my dad would be really upset and that the ire would be terrifying and that I wouldn't want to deal with it. And I realized that I had no real assertiveness skills because I didn't know how. And when I first started becoming assertive, it was absolutely terrifying for me. And I was always afraid, oh my gosh, like, what kind of repercussions is this going to have? And when I realized, the people in your life who are important in your life, even if you're assertive and you set healthy boundaries, the folks who themselves are learning healthier coping mechanisms, they will understand and respect that. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean, I've lost some people in the last couple of years, but I have found in my own life that the people who are left behind are the more meaningful people in my life. And yes, it was scary, and it's still scary to be assertive, but it's absolutely important. And in the process, I've learned a lot more self-respect, and I've become stronger. And all of this I've learned through therapy and through my therapist, who's been really a godsend. And one last thing that I'll say about that is, find a therapist who works for you, because it really is like dating. I've had therapists in the past that there was no real connection. And when I found Sarah, she has just helped me in so many ways recognize why my patterns have been what they've been, and to help me kind of start dismantling them, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Can I say something to that point, Jessely? Yes. Or do you want to move on to the next? Okay.
No, go.
Because that's so important, what you just said, Carmen, about finding a therapist that works for you. So as we've been talking, I've been telling you about me wearing multiple hats. So I'm kind of the caregiver, but I'm also a clinician. And I think what you just said is so key. And I'm never offended when I meet a new potential client and we both kind of realize that maybe you'd be better served over here with someone else. Or when I'm working with a client and they get to a certain age and then maybe they, like, because again, I work with the little ones, right? So once they get to like puberty age, they're like, oh, maybe I would need a male client, Miss Tiffany, those types of things. And therapy really is about you finding someone you can connect with, and you should want to go to therapy. Like you said, Carmen, I don't know what I would do if I didn't go. And you should feel that connection, but you should also feel like it's working for your needs. Now, that's not to say that therapy is always going to be a walk in the park. At every session, you're going to go home and you're going to be like, yay. No, sometimes you're going to cry. Sometimes you're going to probably hate the fact that your therapist spent 15 minutes on one subject about something that you didn't really want to talk about. But the point is that that person is creating a safe space for you to be vulnerable and to be able to open up and have a dialogue. I talk when I'm out and about having outreach meetings, I say all the time, a therapist can only help someone who's willing to share the information, though. Because I'm with you 1 hour a week at most, maybe every 2 weeks. If you don't come to me, Carmen, with what you really need to tell me, then I could think that you're doing great and everything is going dandy and those things. So it really is a relationship. It's a therapeutic relationship. And you really do want to be able to entrust and bring things to your therapist and feel that they are bouncing off of your ideas as well, and working together with you to navigate your journey. It's not going to be easy all the time, but it should definitely feel like there's some connection there, and some magic is happening. I love when I feel the magic happening as a clinician. So, but I agree with you on that one, Carmen. So I just wanted to jump in for that.
Thank you. That was, yes, that's quite, so I'll add, I'm also in psychotherapy. I'm a psychotherapist and attend psychotherapy for work stress, work-related stress, life-related stressors. And I find it very important as part of like my structure, just like try to go to the gym or try to get my steps in, it's that time that I take out to kind of think about what's kind of going on through the day. So I really value guys being so open and honest about that experience. And we're wrapping up, so I want to make sure I open it up for some questions in the last couple of minutes, and I do want to include some resources. But I just also wanted to share, for me, National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, or BIPOC Mental Health Awareness Month, is so important. To me, it's at like at the heart of advocacy, because to me, one of the functions of oppression is to instill fear. And one of the functions of the way racism and all the isms have worked in the United States is to instill fear and to really dehumanize us and not make our struggle seem worthy and kind of our fault, right? It's your fault. And in reality, the mental health system has been used in the past against people of color to kind of label behaviors that were a function of the oppression that they were living in. So I at the same time, I want to dispel myths. I understand the fears that people really have about seeing a provider and kind of being stigmatized or being, experiencing bias directly, or just racism, or discrimination very upfront. But finding ways to overcome that fear, finding programs that reflect your community and that feel in community, that don't feel so kind of forced, I think can make a real difference. And working like, yes, faith-based services and church and faith is not a cure for mental health, but it's a great support system. So just finding ways to collaborate and integrate these things, I think, is so valuable for our community, and just being able to speak up despite our fear, because that's really how we change the system. Asking for therapists that understand our experience better, that have been through some training and can really speak to the issues of your community, I think is very invaluable and very important, and can make a big difference. So thank you both for sharing I don't know if you wanted to add any thoughts on what I said. I see you both nodding, so just in case.
Oh, I think that you put it together well, that it really is. And, you know, as you mentioned it, I'm thinking of papers that I'm writing right now, because this is what my my research is on. And it really is about eradicating stigma, but still recognizing the systemic oppression and all the isms that you mentioned that have played a legitimate role in why people are reluctant on seeking services. And I think that we can continue having these dialogues to let the community know that we are women who attend therapy. We are advocates in the community for mental health services and just the conversation in general. But we are also working to break down those barriers that systemic oppression has placed before us, because we're not, just because we're saying go to therapy doesn't mean I'm saying go to therapy and not recognizing the fact that you may have a hard time finding a therapist depending on what type of health insurance you have. I'm just saying that it's still worth you pursuing it, but with organizations like NAMI and other organizations that exist, there may be avenues that you can have some type of ease to be able to navigate, or a friendly face to help you navigate it, because some of that is our own internal fear that you were discussing. So it's like, I don't even know what to say when I call. So in NAMI, we're peers. So someone is there. And if you want to make that phone call today for the first time, I will stay with you on the phone while you make the call, or I'll be in the office. You just knock on the door if you have any questions for me, like that type of thing. So I definitely appreciate you recognizing that these challenges do exist for a real reason, but we're still saying that let's continue to still receive what we need while we're still working on getting rid of these challenges.
There is power in saying there is something wrong with me and I have been affected by the experiences that have happened to me in my life. To me, there's great power in that. And I hope that those listening and who got to listen to Carmen's story, to me, Carmen has great power. And Tiffany, you have great power. You've, turned those experiences into power. And how more people can do that, I think that is very healing for us. Healing doesn't always feel good. It's admitting, something is wrong and seeking help for that, and demanding help for that, the right kind of help that you deserve.
Can I just maybe say one last thing?
Sure.
In terms of that, Jessely, also important for anybody listening that it's about you. So whatever it is that you're doing when you're seeking help, it's about you and your quality of life, because unfortunately, there are some unhealthy dynamics in families. I've experienced that in my own extended family now, where sometimes where you begin to become assertive or begin to kind of step into your power, that other people feel threatened, right? Because sometimes, even if something is unhealthy, it's what we know, right? And then when somebody starts shaking that ground a little bit, it's like, uh-oh, what does this mean for the rest of us? So it's important. People might try to guilt you. People might try to make you feel a certain type of way for going to therapy or for doing something for yourself. It's important to keep reiterating to yourself, this is for me, this is for my quality of life. So.
Thank you. So I'm going to open it up for any questions. If there's any questions, you can and put it in the chat or through the Q&A for Tiffany or Carmen. I'll give a few minutes for that. Like a minute or so. I'm not seeing anything coming up. Okay. So, thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Tiffany, for joining us on this very, very important discussion and really kind of launching for us the continuation of our work towards, and empowering and advancing BIPOC mental health. We started this series really last year, and Tiffany, you were a part of this, where we had a series of Black and Latino mental health roundtables, where we joined with different communities throughout the state to really talk about these issues and what the barriers are and come forward with a policy agenda. And we're really thankful that some of these policy agendas have really come to fruition. So for example, we were able to increase access to bilingual psychiatric residencies, as well as expand bilingual mental health services in New Jersey. So just kind of showing that putting people in the room and using your voice can work, and we can advocate for the change that our community needs. So I'm just going to share a PowerPoint real quick. These are our reports, and I believe that Francesca has put them in the chat. I also want to highlight in terms of BIPOC Mental Health Awareness Month that this weekend, the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline was launched by the New Jersey Division of Mental Health Services. This is a very, very important effort, and we want to hear from you as to how it's working, what is working about it, and how we can make that better. And we want to start really using this line because the most important thing about it is that it reduces the risk of somebody experiencing a mental health crisis having an encounter with a police officer. They are going to be approached by a crisis worker instead. So there will be a paired approach to reduce the risk of trauma to the person experiencing that mental health crisis, so that they don't have to encounter police. So how does it work? You pick up the phone, you or your family member or loved one is having a mental health crisis. You are fearing for their safety or yours, feeling kind of trapped, no way out. You call 988 and you'll be directed to a mental health professional who can conduct like a basic assessment. Sometimes just having that call is available. And the next steps will determine whether you'll need a larger mobile response team or be engaged in other kind of services that you may need. So I really want to highlight that. Please spread the word. It's language accessible. So regardless of the language you speak, it has multiple languages that you can press and has simultaneous translation so that you can all have access to a mental health crisis without fearing a police intervention. This is very important for communities of color and immigrant communities. And the second thing I'd like to share is our upcoming event, our second event for this month. We will be highlighting Latino men's mental health. So we'll be recognizing the mental health of our brothers in the struggle and the unique experiences that men of color face when looking for support and services. So I do actually see something in the chat, and I wanna end some Q&A. So one of the questions actually is, what are the panel's thoughts on the newly created 988 emergency hotline?
So I'll start with my thoughts. I definitely am supportive of it. I think what 988 provides is an opportunity for resources to be put there, to be provided, and there not be as much of a stigma behind making that call. I used to do a lot of work in homes, and I know that one of the challenges that the families always talked about was if they did have to call mobile support or they did have to call the police, and we talk about this at NAMI too, you don't know if you're getting someone who's really mental health aid certified and really understand what they're walking into. So I think the opportunity of 988 provides that. I also think that it allows for someone, to Carmen's point earlier about maybe you want to seek help, maybe you want to talk to somebody, but your family's kind of making you seem like, oh, well, why would you want to do that or that type of thing? You making this call, it doesn't have to be broadcasted to everybody, right? And this allows you to have a more of a personalized dialogue with someone who can then provide you with resources as to where to go next. So I'm definitely a support for 98.
What do you think, Carmen? Is Carmen still on?
Yeah, I piggyback everything that Tiffany said. I would also add that it's just a quicker number. It's like, when you think of 911, it's like a quick number, so the same now with 988, because I know that the former number was like really long and hard to remember. And if you're in a crisis, you want to get to someone quickly. So I think it's wonderful.
Thank you. Last question, where can we follow you and your work?
So if it's helpful, I can put it in the chat so that way when I say it, people aren't trying to write it down. So I'll put it in the chat, but I'll give you NAMI's. We're on Facebook and Instagram. I'll give you the website, and then I'll also give you my mental health team page, as I do a lot of advocacy and those types of things through my platforms as well.
For me, it's really easy. My LinkedIn is my name. You can find me pretty quickly, Carmen Cusido. And then in terms of social media, at Twitter, on Twitter it's at Carmen Cusido, so my full name. And on Instagram it's at C Cusido, so first initial, last name.
Thank you. All right. I don't see any other questions in the chat or via Q&A. Those resources are being provided in the chat. Thank you, Carmen, so much. By the way, congratulations on being on Oprah Daily. I did read your article. That was great. Just showing,
Thank you.
Shattering those ceilings like they don't exist. That's really impressive. And Tiffany, good luck on your doctorate program. I completed that program, and just when you think you got it, it's over. So.
Oh, that's where I am right now. I'm like waiting for May 2023 to get here.
You will get there. You will get there.
Thank you. I put the two links in there. So NAMI-NJ AACT-NOW, and then also mental health team for both Instagram and Facebook.
Carmen, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm on my phone, so it's hard for me to type into the chat, but Jessie, if anybody's asking, you can certainly share my information.
Sure, we will email. We will also be sharing. So we're recording, and we'll be sharing this on our YouTube channel, LANF Foundation. On YouTube, you can look us up and subscribe and watch our past events on there. This event will also be translated and available in Spanish for sharing in the community. And we will be including in there the links that we shared in the chat, as well as emailing everybody who registered the resources that were provided today, including your contact information, Carmen. So thank you so much.
Perfect. Well, thank you again for having us today and for continuing this very needed conversation within our communities. So just hats off to you all for organizing this.
Yes, thank you.
No, thank you guys. We really appreciate. And thank you, the audience, for joining us. Thank you to our team. There's some people in the background that you're probably only seeing in the chat. They are key to this. They pulled it all together. Francesca Baroni, our policy director, and Sarai Ramos, who is our health justice coordinator. And we also want to thank our interpretation and translating team that will be working to make this accessible to the Latino community, Nayeli Salazar and her great team. So thank you all for joining us. Please stay tuned to our next event next week at 12 p.m. on Latino men's mental health. And we really appreciate you all for coming. Self-care, take light, and just do your best, right? I always say, we're all doing the best we can with what we have at the given time. That's the message I always got from.
Absolutely.
So there's no shame in if times you feel like you don't have everything that you need. Just know that there's supports out there to reach out. There's now the 988 number. NAMI New Jersey is an excellent resource, and there are ways to access services in the community and people who can help. So hopefully you reach out, and that works. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.